Assessing Kirkpatrick's Level 3 behavior. So what do we mean by behavior? In Level 2, we were looking at, can the participants do the knowledge or skills that we were trying to impart in the training workshop? In Level 3, we ask, will the participants actually do these things after they leave our workshop? And a parallel that I was thinking about is, right now I'm taking trying to teach myself some Spanish, and I'm using an online app called Duolingo. I'm rocking it. I'm doing really well at the quizzes. So from a level 2 perspective, I'm doing very well with my Spanish. But in March, I'm going to Mexico. When I go to Mexico, will I actually be able to speak any Spanish? That's going to be level 3. Have I absorbed enough to actually go and use the stuff that I learned in this app? So same kind of thing with your students. When they leave the library workshop, will they actually retain what you have taught them? The student learning outcomes are the assessment indicators, and it's super duper important that the student learning outcomes that you choose align with the professor's assignment. We have had some spectacular failures because we had something in our rubric, an indicator, that the professor was not requiring. And so you can look at the paper, and if you have, let me go to some of the sample indicators. I think this will help. So here are some very common student learning indicators that are looked at in information literacy. Students will be able to utilize basic research skills to find appropriate sources. They'll be able to create accurate in-text citations and references using an improved documentation style. Students will be able to evaluate sources for credibility. So very common ones. We were doing a study of student research papers, and we had this outcome: students will be able to utilize basic research skills to find appropriate sources. And we were using annotated bibliographies. But it turned out that some professors did not require students to record how they found the source. They talked all about the evaluation aspect, which was great, but for that first one, the students did not have to say, I went to this database, I used these search terms. So for all those student papers, we had to score them at the lowest, not present, because the professor had not required it. So to spare yourself the heartbreak of having that happen, make sure that whatever you want to assess is required by the professor. So some common methods are pre and post test, artifact analysis, and observed behaviors. And I'll talk about each one of these, but first I want to say that for all of them, for level 3, you're going to end up having to create a rubric. And in level 2, we played with kind of like a baby rubric. That was our scoring matrix. And an actual rubric, you'll have your indicators, and then you will have 4 levels indicating how proficient the student is for each of those particular learning outcomes. So in a pre and post test situation, those are rarely multiple choice questions in our world. Usually it's like you have them the students do a little baby research paper or some kind of research assignment, and then they come to the library workshop, and then the major assignment is afterwards, and you could compare the 2 papers. Artifact analysis is very similar, but you're usually looking at just the final paper. That could be the research paper, and you're looking at the citations within the paper. It could be an annotated bibliography. It could be a research narrative. And then the observed behaviors is one that I haven't used, but is similar, it seems, to usability studies, where you would have students sometime after the workshop come in, put them in front of a computer and say, show me how you would find articles about whether rap music makes people misogynistic. And then you would record what they would do. Once again, though, you would need some kind of rubric to indicate at what level the students are performing. So a few tips for level 3 assessment. In case you haven't figured this out, it takes a lot of time. It's much more time consuming than level 1 or level 2 assessment. One other thing with the time is sampling can be your friend. So when we have a pool of papers, we usually aim for 10% to be coded, to be used for this assessment. And there are, if you're interested, specific calculators you can use to find out exactly what number of your pool would be a valid sample. Rule of thumb is about 10%. So we're doing a project right now where we had a pool of 400 papers, and so we're looking at 40 of them and coding them. And the next tip I have for you is build a team. I know some of you are from really small shops, and if you can get in touch with a professor in education, or if you have an office of assessment, someone who has expertise in creating rubrics, that will save you a lot of time and heartache, because it's terrible when you build a rubric and then after you finish the assessment you realize the rubric wasn't well designed. So tap the expertise that you might have available to you, and you want to try and find some fellow coders. And the indicator of reliability usually means that you want to have at least 2 people code each artifact. So the more people you have involved, the more you can spread out the artifacts, and the better your results are going to be. Now, if this is all in-house and there's only you can still do this. It just means that the validity isn't quite as strong, and that is probably more important for outside presentations than for inward-facing assessment. When you do have fellow coders, a lot of you have picked this up already with the level 2 practice we've done. Norm, norm, norm. You have to have a session where you sit down with the other people who are coding the artifacts and make sure that you're all using and interpreting the rubric the same way. So in addition to the papers that you're actually going to code, you'll also have a set of about 10 that you will code together, just to get all of you into the same path. And my final tip is to adjust your expectations. Level 3 gives you a lot of great information, but the correlation to the one-shot is weaker. First off, there's that time gap. So they say you want at least 6 weeks. You know, sometimes it's shorter, but the rule of thumb is usually about 6 weeks from the training to when you're doing a level 3 assessment. And a lot of things can happen between the time they leave the library and by the time that they write their paper. So it could be that they have a one-on-one with their professor who teaches them all about the library. They could come to the reference desk and get their sources that way. They could have a friend who teaches them about the library. Sometimes professors on their own will have, hey, bring your laptops, I'm going to show you how to use the library in this way. That could happen. All those things could happen and you don't know, so you can't say students are succeeding because of my library instruction. Now you can say things like, well, this section did better and they had a library session than this section that did not have a library session. But once again, you don't want to say that there's causation there, because we just can't be sure, but we can talk about a little about correlation there. It's also not very good for improving instruction. Often your pool will include multiple classes, so you can't say, well, I did this active learning technique and so it worked out well for these papers. Time has passed. You may forget what you've done in the workshops, and many librarians may have taught the workshops too. If you're in like my team has 6 librarians and we don't know who's taught what because the papers come to us blinded. We don't know which ones are for which librarians. And my librarians have often been very frustrated because they spend all this time scoring the papers, and then they might find out, oh, students really didn't get wildcards and truncations, but it's too late. The semester's over. All those classes are finished. We're not going to see that set of classes for another year. So if they're trying to remember that, and so they would become frustrated because it wasn't a way to right away help the students, and it can be very frustrating to see that students haven't learned something after they've already done all their work. But it is really good for measuring students' informational literacy skills. And so it's a great source of information to bring to the campus and say, students at the sophomore level are here for information literacy. I think you need to ramp up this part, or we have done more instruction and that has led to greater information literacy. So it's better for the outward-facing public, less so for the inward-facing if you're trying to improve your instruction.